Bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos ao nosso segundo dia do.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second day. I will just make a brief summary of what we had yesterday and what we can extract from it. We started with Anvisa, with Dr. Merusi, that talked about this new chapter that we may have with the approval of biosimilars and what we can expect from Anvisa in terms of opportunities to in public hearings. Then we have our colleague Daniel Freire talking about the expectation of physicians, the lack of information. Then Matthias from Merck said that Argentina will win the World Cup, FIFA's World Cup. I think he's wrong, but we could understand the need to accelerate and reduce production costs and the new trends for biosimilar production. Then we had a round table with Tiago Roca from Butantan, Mariana Cerqueira, and Martin Cruz that talked general lines, very interesting things, and two things were really remarkable for me. The need of regionalizing, localizing, it's a very clear trend. And validation and how much this makes our life easier to reduce the complexity of biosimilar production. Tiago mentioned also biosimilars when he talked about vaccines, how the world is more informed, and people ask, where does this vaccine come from? What is the complexity? So there is a new world and a new lingo that people have, and it's very important to explain what a biosimilar is. Then we had a session with Manish Kumar from India that talked about competition, and then Ana Carolina Cardoso about the extrapolation of indications. She was very clear from the beginning, and she talked mainly about the physician perception, clinician perception, and the challenge of regulations based on this perception. Cynthia connected from Mexico. She works in Pfizer, and she addressed interchangeability, what we have, what we don't, what Pfizer does and don't. And she gave a very good tip to consider in the FDA. There's a website we can access and check what is there about interchangeability. Then we had Alessio Pimenta from Cetiva that talked about some products, but mainly the new platforms for antibody purification, contamination, and challenges related to that. I don't know much about production. I was amazed about this new world that is coming and the new possibilities. And the last talk of the day was Diego Baquero talking from Colombia about the development of biosimilar market and the opportunities we have for differentiation. We've discussed how to promote biosimilar, how to position ourselves, and then we had our joint section to exchange ideas. So today's agenda is in the QR code if you want to just read it, and you can download it. For those who didn't fill in our evaluation format, please do so. In the QR code, you have that as well. So take some time to do it, please. So continuing, today we will start the day with success stories in PDP. And I have the honor and pleasure to invite Tiago Marisguia to moderate the session. He is a executive director in Bionovis, and together with Albert King from Samsung. But before that, there are two issues I would like to mention. The disclaimer: everybody here not necessarily represent the opinion of their companies. These are their personal opinions, and no one here has received any compensation to be part in the event. We have opportunity again to have a networking during coffee breaks, and if you have any doubt, we will follow the same methodology as yesterday. There's a microphone here in the audience and for those connecting through the internet, you can use the raise hand button in Zoom or leave your question in the chat. All the presentations and everything discussed will be available as of next Friday, and you will receive them through email. The email you registered for the event will be the one we will use to send you the presentation. So continuing with today's session, I will invite Tiago from Bionovis and Mr. Albert King.
Bom dia. Hello, I can hear you.
Okay, great. That's a good word. You can survive here in Brazil if you know two words. One is bom dia, the next one is give me a beer. Ou seja, me dá uma cerveja. That's the way you can, if you learn this, you can survive here. So Albert King, welcome to our session here. I just want to invite you be on here to moderate this session.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Marcelo, for the kind introduction. Hi, Albert. Good to see you. You are beautiful on the screen over here with the audience. Thank you to the organizers, German, Liliana, Danielle, all the team from Jack Leckerman. So my role here is just to introduce Albert. Albert's going to make a brief speech about his experience with PDPs in Brazil so far. So Albert King is currently the Vice President Commercial for Samsung Bioapps Global. Has been together with Brazilian institutions like Biomanguinhos, which is here at Tatiana and Novis, File, and Albert. So please, if you want to start.
Yes, thank you, Tiago, for your kind introduction. Let me just put up the presentation on the screen so everybody can see the presentation.
Yes, we see. So if you could just put in presentation mode, please. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Albert.
All right, good. So hello again, everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's such a great honor to be part of this forum and have a chance to present the Samsung Bioapps as well as the PDP success stories in Brazil. But before I get started, perhaps if you allow me, I'll take a few moments to go over Samsung Group as well as the Samsung Bioapps before I get into the PDP Pacific details. So as many of you are very familiar with the brand of Samsung. I think that exposure has come from electronics, mainly the handphones, TVs, and home appliances. To give you a better outlook, the history of Samsung today, it's a global organization with the 85 years of history, and we are a global leader across various industries such as electronics, and we're also in electronics engineering and construction and finance. And for about a decade ago, we identified healthcare and biotech as the next growth pillar of Samsung Group, and we have entered into this very lucrative industry about 10 years ago. And our DNAs, our success has always relied upon our clear drive for quality excellence, supply resilience, as well as continuous innovation. And these are key success factors that have driven us to be Samsung today. The quick overview of Samsung Bioepis. As the name suggests, our mission is well reflected in our name. It's taken from the Greek word bio, meaning life, and episteme, meaning science. We have 10 years of history based in Korea. And within this very short history, we already have 6 biosimilar products approved and marketed in major markets of the world. And there are about 5 early or late stage biosimilars in our pipeline. And we are a very biosimilar dedicated company, and we continue to strive on this platform to provide innovative, high quality biosimilar products at an affordable prices in order to expand access to the needy patients around the world. So our therapeutic focus and areas of our biosimilars are mainly in 5 therapeutic areas, ranging from immunology, oncology, ophthalmology, hematology, and endocrinology. And the 6 products that are approved and marketed in various parts of the world are infliximab, etanercept, adalimumab, trastuzumab, bevacizumab, and most recently, ranibizumab is approved and marketed in the US and going to be expanded into the Europe and other parts of the world very soon. And we are continuing to work on the next pipeline to bring them to the market as soon as possible. And we're working on aflibercept, eculizumab, as well as denosuzumab as the next wave of biosimilars in order to introduce them to the markets. So we have our very extensive global and marketing and sales network through commercialization partners. And in Brazil, our partnerships are with Bionovis and Biomanganese in order to serve the public market of Brazil. 2019 was a significant year for us as our first immunology biosimilar product became available in Brazil, and this was possible through a productive development partnership, namely PDP, with our local partners Bionovis and Biomanganese. A year later, in 2020, our first oncology biosimilar and second product launched in Brazil through the same PDP partnership with Biomanganese and Bionovis. Under the PDP, Samsung Bioepis supplies biosimilar products or product intermediaries to the local partners for sale in the public market for a period of 10 years. And during this period, Samsung Bioepis provides technology transfer to the local partners so the manufacturing responsibilities can gradually be transferred to enable local production in Brazil. Marketing authorizations for our 2 products, etanercept biosimilar and trastuzumab biosimilar have already been transferred to Biomanganese. Since our 10-year PDP is completed, once our 10-year PDP is completed, local manufacturing and supply will be made available and feasible by the local partners. The adoption of biosimilars is gradually gaining traction in Brazil, and government facility initiatives like the PDP and the uptake of biosimilars could go hand in hand for expanding access to medicines and supporting the country's biopharmaceutical industry. As of July this year, nearly 55,000 Brazilian patients have been treated with our biosimilar products through PDP since 2019. Over the last 3 years, we have worked tirelessly with our partners, Bionovis and Biomanganese, to make sure the PDP program is successful. We are proud to say that we are the first Korean pharmaceutical company in 2019 to supply biosimilar products through the PDP. 1/3 of our 10-year PDP partnership have passed on the back of our strong partnership and trust, and our next steps are completing technology transfer throughout the remaining years. We are certainly committed to ensuring no delay in the process of technology transfer. Our goal is providing our high-quality biosimilars to patients across Brazil and working closely with our local partners to enhance patient access. On top of that, we want to play our part in contributing to the long-term development of the Brazilian biopharmaceutical industry by sharing our scientific knowledge with our local partners. At present, we have gained approval for 4 products so far in Brazil, 3 immunology biosimilars and 1 oncology biosimilar. We will continue to demonstrate our enduring commitment to biosimilars by further strengthening our pipeline and widening their availability for patients and healthcare systems in Brazil. We will keep looking for opportunities to play our role in contributing to the growth and development of the Brazilian pharmaceutical industry. We remain committed to providing the necessary support for the government, healthcare systems, patients, and healthcare providers so that biosimilars could play a role in expanding and enhancing access to treatment options in Brazil, while taking the pressure off the government's financial burden on healthcare. Brazil is certainly one of the important markets for Samsung Bioepis, and we will continue to build our profile and presence in Brazil. This concludes my presentation. I thank you again for listening and giving me the opportunity to talk about Samsung Bioepis and our PDP success stories in Brazil. Obrigado.
Thank you, Albert. So now, according to the program, I'm going to make a short presentation about the role of a national company in the scope of the PDP, 10 minutes only. Albert will stay with us. After that, we're going to have a chat. And after that, we open for questions from the audience, both in presence here and virtually. And Marcelo is going to help me with that. So if we could start. So again, my name is Tiago, currently Vice President at Bionovis. So the idea here is to talk about the role of a company like Bionovis, a private national company, in the scope of this complex structure, which is a PDP. So just trying to move forward here. All right. So just a potential conflict of interest statement. Bionovis engaged with several productive development partnerships, PDPs, with Biomanganese, Samsung, and some other companies. Okay. And just about Bionovis, it's a company that was created 10 years ago. I was watching presentation from Albert here, and Samsung Bioepis has exactly the same age as Bionovis. Both companies were created in 2012. I'm going to have a question to Albert afterwards about that, comparing Korea and Brazil. So at the end of the day, Bionovis has a focus in biotechnology, pharmaceutical only. We do not work with small molecules. and to do research, development, production, and marketing of other Brazil, Latin America, and other highly regulated markets. We have a focus on innovation. We are working to reach that stage in the company. But in the very first stage of the company, we're fully committed with the productive development partnerships with what we call in Brazil, the Health, Industrial, and Economic Complex, the CIS, from the Ministry of Health. Just a snapshot on Bionovis shareholders. We are a joint venture composed of four from a company. They are listed here: ANC Group, BMS, Ipera, Axê, and União Química. Those companies put together their efforts in terms of investments, risk sharing, to really start some biotech initiative more than 10 years ago. They're fully committed with Bionovis. We have a shareholders agreement that is in place since then and working properly. The company is very strong and robust in terms of inventory arrangements. This is models of Bionovis, they go beyond PDPs. So we have a plan that is ongoing to enter the private market as well in early next year. For that, we are diversifying our business models beyond the PDPs. We are working on pure licensing, in-house development of fully owned products, both biosimilars and innovative biopharmaceuticals, as well as since now we have a facility in place, we have industry scale capabilities to produce API of monoclonal antibodies, for instance, already in place. Everybody's invited to visit Bionovis and check about the results of this policy, which is the PDP policy. And with these capabilities in place, we also start to discuss possibilities of working as a CMO to produce products for Brazil and to export as well. So that's the natural evolution of such investment as planned by the shareholders, right? Again, about the strategic partnerships. So I have the pleasure of having a beloved partner here, which is Albert and Samsung Bioepis. At the end of the day, this partnership is evolving very strongly. I'm going to give you a glimpse on the perspective of Bionovis. We also have some other partners from the private market, listed as Janssen, Merck from Germany, also Sandoz, and more recently Fresenius Kabi. They all are fully committed with the PDP policy. Our governmental partner is Biomanguinhos, Fiocruz Foundation, and also some support from the policy is kind of interministerial, not only involved in the Ministry of Health in Brazil. Regarding the pipeline and portfolio, Albert already mentioned the first biosimilar to be introduced in the public health system, I mean, highly complex biopharmaceutical, biosimilar, right? A fusion protein, but the same complexity as a monoclonal antibody was Anicept. Trastuzumab followed, and also these ones from Samsung, the partnerships with Samsung. We also have rituximab and adalimumab with respectively with Sandoz and Fresenius Kabi. In fact, this PDP for adalimumab is the seventh PDP between Biomanguinhos and Bionovis to be put in place. The product has just been launched in the public health system a couple of weeks ago. And we have more PDPs. PDPs are about transferring the technology independent of the origin or the nature of the product. So if originators want to transfer their technology, they are invited to do so. And we have long-term partnership with Janssen for both Remicade and Simponi, respectively infliximab and golimumab, which are going on pretty well as well. And also with Merck for another originator, which is Rebif, beta interferon 1A for the treatment of multiple sclerosis, for instance. And we have another couple of PDP together with Biomanguinhos following in the next years. When products are ready to enter the market, they are still in some stages to reach that level, involving two other molecules. And just to remember, I saw from the online vision that yesterday there were some discussions about PDPs, and the PDP model involves an open contest, a public opportunity for every company in the world to come to Brazil and make investments, to manufacture locally, fully manufacture, from the master cell bank until the very finished product. If the company is willing to do this kind of investment in Brazil, independent of the nature of the capital of the company, doesn't need to be a Brazilian company as Bionovis, but this is mandatory, together with the public laboratory that has to do the investments as well. So this is an open contest. Bionovis was there together with Biomanguinhos during the past years, and we are able to achieve those opportunities, winning these opportunities with high quality projects. Okay, about the PDPs, everybody knows there's a technology holder. Since the technology is not present or was not in Brazil a few years ago, this technology has to be transferred when it comes to biologics in up to 10 years time frame to both a private company in Brazil that's going to do the investment, make the investment in manufacturing together with this public institution. And the public institution supplies the Ministry of Health up to 10 years with semi-exclusive or exclusive regimen. In this case, we have with Samsung, etanercept, and trastuzumab already in the tech transfer phase, meaning the phase 3 of the PDP, as we call. As a result, we are bringing the technology and also increasing access. One of the very milestones of the PDPs are about the market authorization holder or the market authorization transfer to the public institution. So by now, etanercept and trastuzumab, they are called Biomanguinhos etanercept and Biomanguinhos trastuzumab, already serving the public health system for a while with products that are stepwisely being manufactured locally. So for etanercept, for instance, we are now entering the phase of initiate API tech transfer in pilot scale. And now, so all the methodologies are already transferred. There's a huge package of analytical methods to be transferred in each PDP. Everybody thinks about the cell line, the upstream, downstream, but there's a huge structure around those processes. I'm going to show a slide about that, which is quite obvious, but from time to time, people tend to forget about that, right? And Samsung, as a very high-level company, fully compliant with the most robust regulation in the world, not different in Brazil, they are involved with Biomanguinhos and Bionovis in several areas. So there's also, beyond the PMO, I guess it's not pointing here, but beyond the PMO, there are several areas involved beyond the tech transfer, regulatory affairs, quality control, quality assurance. There are many people involved, worldwide speaking, transferring this knowledge, this technology, these quality standards to Brazil. When it comes to biosimilars specifically, there's a concern, not for myself, because I understand this applies not only to biosimilars, but to every product, to every biologic. It's not about biosimilars only, because when it comes to biosimilars, somebody tends to say that, okay, pharmacovigilance is a problem. No, it's a problem. If it's a problem for every molecule, not only for biosimilars. It's about the structure of pharmacovigilance in Brazil or in another country, right? But at the end of the day, it's important because we are transferring the technology to Brazil. The product's going to be delivered to the SUS on behalf of Biomanguinhos. We need to manufacture it locally, following the regulation, the quality standards, not only from Anvisa, but also from the partner. Samsung has a very strict quality framework, which we need to obey by contract. So, of course, we are willing to receive approval from Anvisa, but we must also seek approval from the international partner to be compliant with their quality standards, the reputation of the product worldwide speaking. So that's a tremendous, let's say, burden that we need to absorb. At the end of the day, is also an opportunity to leverage the quality of what we are building here to be compliant, not only with Anvisa, but at the end of the day, we're going to be compliant with FDA and EMA. That's what we are seeking for the near future, right? Well, moving forward fast, how to succeed with PDPs. That's not a formula. We are trying to do our best here for the past 10 years at Bionovis. For several reasons, we may have succeeded so far, but at the end of the day, it comes to strong partners. Bionovis has been working diligently in the past years to find the best partners in the world that would be fully committed, really committed in transferring the whole technology to Brazil, following all the rules from the regulation that are put by the MOH, that are suffering, let's say, evolutions. We have Biomanguinhos, which is a centenary institution with plenty of experience with tech transfer. Thanks to Biomanguinhos and thanks to the accumulated experience, they were able to contribute immensely with the vaccination strategy for COVID, for instance. It's just, let's say, a collateral result of the PDP. PDP is focused in the monoclonal antibodies that we are talking about here, etanercept, but thanks to that as well, Biomanguinhos was able to attend this claim from the society, from the Brazilian government to serve us for the COVID, for instance. And so this part is put together, highly qualified human resources. This is the part to be willing really for knowledge in detail completely. So training from people coming from Samsung to Brazil, people from Brazil coming there. It reflects also to the other partners that we have. They follow the same guidelines. It's very important. I have to say that this is the main important asset that Bionovis is building up, is its human resources. We have this highly qualified people working with us that have been trained worldwide in the headquarters of the partners that we have, absorbing very critical and strategic knowledge that we are now putting on the service for our own products as well. Excellent governance, it's really critical. It's really a pain to develop a PDP. Tatiana is here. We know that this is very complex to be achieved. We have a lot of commitments towards the government and the society. So it's really critical to follow up that. Another word important is resilience. We see a lot of PDPs failing for many reasons, different reasons, but we need to be resilient in a daily basis. Brazil is not for amateurs, we know. And at the end of the day, it's a policy that needs to evolve to be a state policy, not a governmental policy. We are working daily for that evolution. Compliance with the PDP regulatory framework, I already mentioned that. And regarding Bionovis and Biomanguinhos, we have been successful for 100% success. 7 PDPs were planned 10 years ago. We have 7 PDPs in place by now, following strictly the rules that were put by the regulation. Not a single penalty from the MOH so far. And that's the way we work and the partners that we have, such as Albert here. Regarding Bionovis, just to finish, the evolution of employees, Bionovis was created from nothing. We started with 4 people, now we are 210, and products in the market already 7. Not only PDPs, we are evolving to different business models right now. That's another phase of the company. Part of the team before the pandemic, and these people are working on a stepwise approach to evolve with our competences. PDPs are in place. We have now structured knowledge and human resources to start working in different projects like CDMO activities, for instance. We are discussing that. We are starting to develop our own products, biosimilar and innovative products. And we want, of course, to achieve the holy grail, which is to do disruptive innovation in this field. Maybe by co-development in the beginning, but that's a must. Brazil cannot be only a consumer of those products. We need to generate innovation and knowledge. That's the main aim of this policy and of Bionovis. Just some examples here. We were the first company to manufacture an originator monoclonal antibody in Brazil, together with Biomanguinhos. It was this year. We had another company, Leaps, that manufactured the first biosimilar, which we fully respect. We admire a lot companies that were the pioneers. That's already being manufactured at Bionovis, industrial batches of infliximab. And also the knowledge serves as a basis for us to embrace disruptive innovation initiatives. So we work together with a Brazilian institution and university to produce at Bionovis clinical batches of antigens for a COVID Brazilian vaccine. That's the level of knowledge that we already have, fully compliant with the Anvisa's regulations and everything. The future is about local manufacturing is important, but more than that, together with that, it's about the knowledge that is in place in Brazil to keep evolving with that towards innovation and our own products. Regulation is being continuously reinforced. Anvisa is very prolific at that, and we are, I guess, very aligned with them. Also, the regulation for PDPs is evolving. Right now, there's a revision, an update of the PDP regulation ongoing. We expect that by the end of the year, this should be in place with robustness and transparency to attract more players to come to Brazil and make investments. And patient access, which is more important, will continue to increase. Thanks also to biosimilars, but thanks also to local manufacturing, which at the end of the day will bring prices down, will bring sustainability to the public health system, will bring autonomy to Brazil, not to depend 100% on unimportant APIs or finished product of that nature. So it was all about that. Thank you so much. So now I guess we can come to conversation. Right, Albert?
Great presentation, Tiago.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Albert, I have some questions here for you. Another one that I separated here for the end, but at the end of the day, you share with us here your perception about the PDPs. I made a joke here that Brazil is not for amateurs. So in your opinion, what brought Samsung to make a partnership with a public institution as Biomanguinhos? Bionov is a Brazilian company, to decide to share core technology from such as Samsung Bioepis, Samsung Biologics with Brazil. So in your opinion, why Samsung decided to do that?
I mean, for us, thank you for that question, Tiago. For us, Brazil is such an important market in the world. I mean, obviously, the big pharmas usually go after the big markets such as the US and Europe. But if I look at the landscape, Brazil offers a huge opportunities, and there are still unmet needs in Brazil where biosimilars could play a big role in order to treat and make the high quality biosimilars more accessible to the patients. So based on that, we embarked on a search for how to enter the Brazilian market, and the discussions and the finalization of the PDP, which is an excellent program in terms of attracting the multinational companies into a big markets like Brazil, was a great platform that we saw. And finding a great partners like Bionovis and Biomanguinhos was such a great honor to have that PDP in place and serve the needs, and at the same time being able to provide technology transfer to you guys so that this becomes over time sustainable project. So I think we're fulfilling two sides of the equation at the same time, both from a commercial perspective, but also from a technology side, where we're actually helping and enhancing the local industries in Brazil.
Okay, Albert, thank you. And regarding the future, so do you see Samsung keep, let's say, considering the PDP model for the future if there are other opportunities or other models that maybe Samsung could approach in Brazil?
I think with the success of two biosimilars in the PDP with Bionovis and Biomanguinhos, as I explained before, we have other pipelines coming through, and our obviously the first priority is look for a PDP partners to make sure that we enjoy such same success as we have for the Etanercept and the Trastuzumab biosimilars. So I think it's a great entry for us. It gives us a lot of benefits. It's actually a mutual benefits for the patients of Brazilians, as well as the private and the public companies in Brazil. So I think it's meeting the needs of many stakeholders. So PDP certainly our priority when we enter and launch the new products in Brazil, certainly.
Sorry, I was changing the microphone here, Albert. Thank you. So just one last question for myself, and then Marcelo, I'm going to deliver to him to open to the audience. Albert, I was watching here your presentation about the age of Samsung Bioepis. I was commenting on that in the beginning of my presentation. So it's exactly the same age of Bionovis. We have other companies in Brazil that are a little bit elder than Bionovis in terms of biotech, including, for instance, I mentioned here, Lips, Cristália, and everything. But beyond, for sure, right? We should the power of biotech in Brazil. Korea is a different game. We see companies like Samsung Bioepis, Samsung Biologics, some of the players. It's really a powerhouse in biotech that was created in some time frame that Brazil was not able to follow. I know that Korea has put in place a policy in the 80s, mid-80s, that decided for three main areas of interest, areas for the country. They were semiconductors, automotive industry, automobiles, and biopharmaceuticals. So it was a country-wise decision joining forces from all over, not only by the public institutions. So that has been going on for decades, continuously, involving investment, human resources training, information, even abroad, let's say, by the Korean government, the investment in private industries. So Brazil, we are a huge country with a lot of potential. So work here, we need to work on policy, that's my opinion, a biotechnology policy for the country. PDP is a tiny piece of this puzzle, but as a country, we need to work on that. So you are already half Brazilian, right? And which would be your, let's say, recommendations for Brazil to reach a level of the Korean country in, let's say, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Great question, Tiago. I think there are many ways to answer that question, but at least from my perspective and our perspectives, in order to grow an industry, as an example of semiconductor and the automobile industries, as you mentioned, there is obviously the commitment from the government, the authorities, to make sure that the industries are properly backed and supported all the way through. The semiconductor and automotive industries, as we are today, very successful in the world. I mean, they've gone through a long way of innovation, and it's gone through a hard work of finding what they have to do in order to stay ahead of the curve in terms of competition. So biotech industry, biologics industry is now the new sort of era in terms of the government commitment. And the area that the Samsung Biologics and Samsung Bioepis are located in is identified as the new hub of biologics. And they're providing a lot of incentives for companies to invest and grow in the biologics industry. So the funding and support, as well as a long-term commitment, is something is very, very crucial, as you mentioned. But at the same time, having the talented young scientists, having that sort of a human resource pipelines to support the R&D platform is also another key pillar in terms of making sure that this pathway becomes very successful. And Korea has been very lucky in a way that we've got several renowned science-oriented universities that are sort of pumping out, if I may say, the young talented graduates who are looking to grow their careers in the biologics the sector. So I think that sort of gels together, and overall public as well as the private partnership is very, very crucial based on what we have seen in Korea.
Okay, thank you so much, Albert. So I'm going to leave now to Marcelo.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Tiago. We have 2 or 3 questions here from the audience, from the chat. Before we move to the audience, just reading here some important questions that we have. The first one is why Bionov's pick up as Pharmanguinhos or Biomanguinhos as a first choice to do that. I mean, people are curious about how is the selection process and how Bionov's tied up with Biomanguinhos.
Okay, well, it was a stepwise approach. It's not like all of a sudden, right? We think that Biomanguinhos is one of the top public institutions in Brazil, able to really execute the PDP. They have infrastructure knowledge for decades of tech transfer experience. And when it comes to a PDP, the role of the public laboratory is really seminal. So having a partner that is really capable, committed in making the investments and having the knowledge, enough capabilities to absorb this technology in the proposed time frame is really key, because it's a tripod. Bionovis can be excellent, the international partner can be excellent, but if the public institution is not able to cope with that excellence, the PDP as a whole is going to fail. There's no prize for one partner beyond the other. It's a tripod. So that was the selection. At the end of the day, Biomanguinhos had the opportunity to select. In fact, it's the opposite. It's not Bionovis who selects Biomanguinhos. It's Biomanguinhos who selects the private partner. And I know that from history, Biomanguinhos has been interacting with other partners. For instance, they have Cristália as a partner for human growth hormone. Germany is here, which is a 100% Brazilian-made product, which is proud for all Brazilians, together with Biomanguinhos. So it's something like that. Okay.
Thank you. There's another two questions here that we can summarize. One, what is the benefit for the government procurement when they do this PDP? Because we know that the tenders year by year, the price is going to be down. We have more competitors in the market.
Yeah.
And with the PDP, you remain with a long-term contract for a period of time, and you establish a price. What is the big benefit for the government? And also the question on the sequence of that is the question about how you split this PDP across the other companies, because we know that some products you see that 30% go for Biomanguinhos, or 20% go for Butantan, 10%, 50% for other companies. How this split come?
Okay, these are key questions, Marcel. Thank you for that. So, when it comes to price, it has to be clear. We are talking here about a technology policy. It's not a price policy. It's binomial. If you decide, or binarial, sorry. If you decide to go for prices, it doesn't go with technology. If you decide for technology, it has to go with prices to a certain limit. So the government is not purchasing products only, it's purchasing technology, entangled with the product. What is key here, at least the model that Biomanguinhos and Bionovis and our partners execute, is that Ministry of Health does not pay a single real on top of what it was already paying before the PDP started. The prices start at a certain level, which is the level of the prices the Ministry of Health was practicing before the PDP enters into force. After that, there are yearly discounts. This is in the regulation, right? Over there, it's very transparent. You gotta give the government discounts in a yearly basis. What was happening until 2 years ago was that the PDPs, when entered the enforced into phase 3, there was no tender. It was in the regulation as well, right? So I'm talking about resilience, about being very resilient, is about also the legal environment, or let's say the uncertainties about the legal environment that comes from time to time. So 2 years ago, the government decided to put together tenders as well, together with the PDPs. What is important is the PDP is a different model. It's about technology. So that is protected. Otherwise, somebody would be breaking contracts, international contracts, delivering signals to the international, let's say, community that Brazil does not respect contracts, which is not the case. The Ministry of Health has been really very respectful to the contracts. And at the end of the day, we are transferring we are receiving the technology from Samsung, from other partners that we have. I see Diana here as well from Fresenius Kabi, another important partner that we have. But at the end of the day, with a price that cannot be compared to tender price. And when it comes to biosimilars, it's a challenge all around the world. Which is the limit for pricing of biosimilars? What about, let's say, disruptive prices, or another name that we may call? We have seen in the past in Brazil, even in Brazil, situations like some vanish of competition, and then the prices go up when there's a monopoly. That's going around in the entire world for some specific molecules, some markets. I know that Europe is concerned about preserving competition over there. It means preserving the biosimilar industry over there. So when it comes to dumping, we have to be aware as a country, not only as companies, what does the country want? And it's not only Brazil, it's not a Brazilian jabuticaba, as we call, something that exists only here. All over the world, we see some level of protection, in the good sense of the word, to preserve strategic assets in the country. After the pandemic, it's absolutely a must for all the countries. US is doing the same, Europe is doing the same, Japan is doing the same, to protect their own industry because it's an asset. To be 100% dependent of importation is not clever. And we also do not need to manufacture locally 100% of everything. This is absolutely impossible. So it's not about prices. But of course, it has to be some savings to the government at the end of the day. And it's important to understand, after the PDP ends, after up to 10 years, the product is going to belong to Biomanguinhos, an institution that has no commitment, at least right as the private companies, with profits. And we see how a company like Biomanguinhos, an institution like Biomanguinhos, or Butantan Institute, I have to say, they are committed in serving the public health system, practicing prices that are very competitive. So after the technology is fully transferred, the contract with the partner ends, and the product is fully owned by the Brazilian public system, and they can decide what price they're going to put there. So you got to look at the whole film, not only as a snapshot, as usually people tend to look when it comes to a tender. They are not non-comparable. Sorry, I forgot the other sentence. I take it too long because it's a complex subject.
No,
sorry.
The other was about how they split this.
Yeah, the split was a decision from the let's say the pioneers of this policy in previous governments, because for some products there were a market big enough from the federal government, centralized purchasing from the Ministry of Health, that in theory could accommodate more than one PDP consortium that could turn into feasible investments. This I see from the government maybe a change in mindset. I would suspect that I would bet, right? It's just a personal expectation that in the future, probably the majority, if not all PDPs, will come to a single consortium, to have 100% of the market to a single consortium. That would make sense for several reasons, including when we are dispensing the product. Now the Ministry of Health has a challenge, how to deal with products from tenders that come and go, products from one PDP, two PDPs, maybe the originator as well is there. So how to deal with that? They have annual contracts, and how to avoid multiple switches if this is the case. So there are several layers of discussion here, but that was the reason.
Thiago, thank you. There is a specific question for King now. It's about, it's great to see Samsung investing and helping our country, helping Brazil on supply and technology transfer for the public market. But what is in your Samsung plan? What is your view on the private market? Because private market in Brazil is really big. And we have a huge problem of access drugs in private market. How do you see that, and how is you address this on your strategic plan for to consider in Brazil in the private market?
Right. For us, our commercialization partner for the private market is actually Organon, which is a spun-off company from Merck, as you may all remember. So all the products are being evaluated to enter the private markets through Organon entity in Brazil. And as of this year, etanercept, trastuzumab, as well as the adalimumab biosimilar is going to be available in the private market, and then we're looking to expand the growth over the next coming years.
Thank you for that. I can stay here with a long discussion because it's a very interesting topic, but I want to open to the audience who wanted to make, before you, there's one person behind you. Just say your name, your company, and if you address the question to Thiago or to King, please.
Hi, Thiago. Hi, Albert. I'm Priscilla from Cristália. I'm in charge of strategic planning for the company. And my question is, I'd like you to comment about how far or close you are to the plans that you have built 10 years before, as you mentioned. PDPs starts 10 years before, and how far or close you are from that regarding volumes and prices, because we know that PDPs are has to do with the pollution scenarios that change every 4 years here in Brazil, and having a third party as Samsung, how to deal with it on a daily basis.
Okay, so maybe I can start. Thank you for the question. Well, we are very close to what was planned, very close, but it's not easy. We have to explain all the time what we are doing, which is the rationale for the prices, for the volumes, for everything. At the end of the day, it's about the contract. It's there. It's the price for the technology. And the government is respecting that. My opinion, just a suggestion from Tiago, not from Bionovis, we should work on pluri-annual contracts, not annual contracts. Every time, every year, we need to come there, negotiate something that is already put in place. Of course, we are not there to expect automatic approval from the MOH in a yearly basis of our premises. It's fair to discuss. But there's exchange rate variations, dramatic ones. When Bionovis was created, the exchange rate was close to 2.3 reais, US dollars, compared to US dollars. Now it's 5 point something. We made a huge investment in a facility, mostly in, euros or dollars during the pandemic. You can imagine the burden for that. What about the economic feasibility? So people tend to forget about that. It's about business, it's about building an investment, a huge investment in Brazil. So there are premises that must be sustainable. We have been successful, but I know that Cristal is doing a terrific job as well. It's a daily work to fight for the premises to be kept. I mean, proper regulation, more robust, more clearer regulation should pacify that for good. Otherwise, maybe some of the companies will not be as resilient as us, or brave enough, or crazy enough to enter into a PDP, right?
Yeah, for us, just to add, I mean, our PDPs with Bionovis and Biomanganese started from 2019. So we're well into the third year, and we've got another 7 years remaining to complete the 10-year cycle of the PDP project. And already, as Tiago mentioned, in the last 3 years, we've seen a lot of ups and downs in terms of the macroeconomic indicators, and specifically the FX rate sort of affecting the whole business case. However, with the great support and commitment of the three partners, we've been very successful, and we are committed to prolong that and complete the whole PDP along with the tech transfer to make sure that these products are made available locally at the end of the 10-year cycle.
Okay, so my name is Johnny Vlaming from Unisima, Belgium, and I have a question regarding the tech transfer process. So I assume this goes all the way up to the master cell bank that needs to be transferred. But then I was wondering, during that PDP process, what level of freedom does the receiving partner or Bionovis have with that technology and that cell bank?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that. The transfer of the master cell bank is mandatory. When Bionovis was created, we talked with virtually every company that could bring the technology to Brazil. A big number of them just escaped from the room when they learned that they should transfer the master cell bank. It was not the case for our partners, which I thank you so much. Samsung, Fresenius is here. They all are committed with that mandatory milestone. We have certain freedom. The freedom starts to be concised or limited when it comes to the time frame. We have up to 10 years to complete the tech transfer. Should be, maybe it's considered too much for some stakeholders, but I can assure you it's not. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles that we may obey thanks to Anvisa, which is very high bar, landscape. But it comes to, let's say, obey the time frame and the milestones from the PDP project. We may be willing to, let's say, optimize some process, whatever. It's going to come with more time, more investment. Will the government allow us to go beyond 10 years? No. So you start to be limited like this. And then, of course, there are contractual terms, which are usually very precious to the technology holders, such as Albert here, Samsung. At the end of the day, usually the technology is being transferred for that purpose. But when the PDP ends after some term, we are owners of the technology, not only of the product. And then we can do whatever we want under certain limits or feasibility analysis, whatever we want with that technology. But we're talking in 10 years time frame maybe in 10 years, there will be another cell line, another something that would be better for us to start using from scratch for a different product, right? These are very interesting discussions that we usually have when you are discussing. But there are some levels of freedom. Some of our partners are global partners. The example here, Samsung. So they have huge bioreactors. Our Brazilian market does not support this level of manufacturing. So we need to adapt that. So we are scaling down part of the technologies from some of our partners. This brings extra burden, extra challenges, including regulatory ones, that we must fit into the timeframes and milestones from the PDP and the contract with the government. So we are working on that. In a stepwise approach, we learn from like-to-like tech transfer, copying exactly what the partner does. Now we are facing some other PDPs where the technologies need to suffer some adaptation. But now we are much more skilled. We have good people with us to embrace this challenge, right? So it was planned like this. We have been executing as planned.
Just one more question from this topic. I think Thiago and Kim can comment on that. But how much Samsung and Bionovis are doing in terms of clinical trials for these new molecules in Brazil, locally in Brazil, to develop the product? Because one thing is, okay, PDP is important, but to have the confidence that we have a good product and also to understand this market is good when you have clinical trials ongoing in the local market. How you are today with clinical trials for the new biosimilars performed in Brazil?
Okay, I'm going to approach very briefly and then leave over to Albert to complete. Because PDPs are not about necessarily clinical trials. When you are transferring a technology, usually at least Bionovis and Biomanguinhos partners, they already have the products fully developed or under development for global basis, global markets. So usually the product, when it comes to Brazil, it's already registered somewhere, either in Europe or the US, and the clinical trials are done. So we are not involved for these PDPs with clinical trials. But of course, we are selecting partners that have a very strong clinical platform that has plenty of evidence for us as a partnership to bring confidence and ensure the patients, the physicians, the government, that the product is really high quality in terms of safety, efficacy, and everything that is needed for a proper biosimilar to be put in the market. But Samsung is an example. Its products have been around for a while in Europe, in the US. Maybe Albert could comment on that.
Yeah, the only thing I can comment is in the process of development of biosimilars, we have to go through phase 1 and phase 3 studies. And in particular for phase 3 studies, we always want to include a diverse ethnicity backgrounds to make sure that our product does get tested in healthy patients around the world. So we always look for clinical trial sites around the world. And Brazil is obviously a key market that we look for in terms of having the site enrolled into the phase 3. So that's where we're always ensuring that the Brazil gets covered along with the other key clinical sites around the world.
Yeah, just to further complement briefly, the only situation where we would need to conduct a clinical trial would be if the technology transfer somehow is not perfect. If the quality attributes, the critical quality attributes from our molecule manufactured here compared to the molecule manufactured there, they're not enough comparable, maybe Anvisa would require additional clinical trial, maybe a PK/PD, whatever, to prove that those differences are not clinically meaningful. But we're not counting on that. That's another reason why we are choosing partners that are very experienced in tech transfer, in bringing the technology from one site to another, in adapting that to help us cope with those risks, to mitigate those risks, right? But when it comes to our own pipeline, of course, we are going to have to conduct proper clinical trials, and Brazil is in the plan for sure.
Okay, thank you, Thiago. Thank you, Albert. It's a great presentation. It's a great discussion. A lot of information you can get this from this session. Thank you so much. I just ask a round of applause for those presenters.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you, Thiago. Thank you, Chairman.
Bueno, ahora cambiamos un poquito para español porque vamos a tener desde de Costa Rica.
Now we will switch to Spanish because we're going to hear from Laura in Costa Rica, who's going to be telling us about protecting patients, minimization and communication of the risk of adverse reactions focused on the clinical practice. I think Laura is already connected. Laura, how are you? Pura vida? Hello, how are you? Okay, so maybe I should explain that. Costa Rica has a unique expression, which is pura vida or pure life. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about this expression. Thank you. And I'd like to thank Jack Leckerman for inviting me to such an important forum with such an important topic. So in Costa Rica, this expression, pure life, exists from the origins of this country because we are characterized as a country that has no army. So everything for us is good. We don't have any conflicts and we have a very good relationship. We're very friendly and cordial, and nature is here for all. So that's why we say pure life. So it's very good. So thank you once again for inviting me to be here. And with that explanation about my country, I'd also like to tell you a brief history. I have been watching the talks since yesterday, and I thought it was very interesting to see how you were able to talk about the different topics around biosimilars. So my intention is to talk about this topic today, but first let me tell you about my conflicts of interest. My participation in this forum, as you know, is not related to any commercial interests or any promotional interests, and this presentation is related only to me. So I'm only here to share my opinion with you. So as I said, since yesterday, we have been watching a number of talks on different topics that have a common denominator. So there are some things that were in everyone's talks. Everyone talks about pharmacovigilance, regulations, and how data is managed. For example, extrapolations, how they are done, and also the side of the patient's safety, of course. So biosimilars are becoming more and more important. But 10 or 15 years ago, we started this challenge with a different point of view for the industry, for authorities, and for patients themselves. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about each topic to conclude with some recommendations about biosimilars. So medical therapy is facing some challenges, not only because there are some changes in different health systems, which are very different. Of course, here I can only speak about Latin America and the Caribbean, but I have also studied in Spain, so I can tell you a little bit about the different attitudes that these areas have. Biosimilars are a new addition to these healthcare systems, and they're coming in very strongly. So they have different structures with different physicians, but global access is limited to many countries. Many countries are limited by their public healthcare systems that look for cheaper treatments. So depending on the quality, some options which are more expensive are not available. And this has created the possibility for biosimilars to come in the last few years, especially in local markets. So we suggest an integrated approach to design these systems. Well, definitely pharmacovigilance in biosimilars is my favorite topic. It should not be below a reference drug. So a lot is discussed when it comes to risks. You need to have a robust risk reduction plan, and you can use the same registration as the originator with a similar base, but until now, for over 10 years, we have had a little bit more experience with biosimilars. So in the EMA, for example, they have not identified any safety issues with these medications that is new or more frequent or more serious in biosimilars versus the reference drug. Developing biosimilars is not something limited to Europe and Latin America. This is also seen. It's definitely a global phenomenon. They are available in patients for patients in over 60 to 70 countries. And at the end of 2016 or 2018, we had many approvals in these countries. And again, as I said, they have all of the legal strength and approvals to be used. But it's very difficult to keep up to date in these numbers because it goes up nearly every day. We're talking about over 60 or 70 biosimilars approved. So for example, in Argentina, Cuba, and Mexico, biosimilars were originally approved as copies, because in the 80s, they did not have patent laws in Latin American countries, for example. So when this process started in Brazil, in 2011, other countries also adapted to biosimilar legislations according to the WHO, and there were already 100 products in the market. In Mexico, they had over 100,000 doses of biosimilars who had without pharmacovigilance data. So despite the recommendation from the Pan American Health Organization for these drugs, you know that it's still very difficult in Latin America. We are dealing with interchangeability legislation, but in some countries, these are not even present. So we definitely have a long way to go. And pharmacovigilance is, of course, always recommended. So it's important to have a constant understanding of the market. So again, as I said, it's a very open landscape of what has happened and what will continue to happen to biosimilars. But what can we say about what we know? Well, we have robust standards of quality, efficacy, and safety, but we need to have a closer look at the totality of the evidence. We know that the goal of developing biosimilars is to confirm safety for the similar to the reference drug. It should have the same safety profile and the same efficacy in a disease population. So that's going to include analytical studies, non-clinical and clinical studies, and certain comparative clinical studies may be required in addition to that to help confirm that there are no differences in the products that are clinically relevant. Here, for example, as I said, we can include solid analytical studies to verify the similarity to the reference drug. Non-clinical tests will be the second part of the process, the second barrier or the second pillar to inspect the toxicity and efficacy levels But comparative pharmacology is very important as well. It's an additional pillar, and in certain cases, additional studies can be justified, as I was said, to make sure that there are no significant differences between products. Well, now we can start talking about safety of biosimilar medicines. As I said before, we are following the same steps of pharmacovigilance. So we need to see, study, and approach these different topics or these different characteristics that could also influence the safety profile. And they're very relevant because biosimilars have specific characteristics. For example, they have a production process that is complex, they have an immunogenicity complex potential, and they might produce different adverse events. So the foreseeability of clinical and preclinical trials and their limits know that we have a limited outlook on the safety of biosimilar medicines for approval. Once again, there is that word, pharmacovigilance, but again, this underscores the importance of it. Due to these specific characteristics in what we do with our patients, with our physicians, and with authorities, these factors may vary. And remember that the characteristics that biosimilars have is that they have high molecular weight, they have a complex structure, so they require a specialized manufacturing process, they have variability, they're more sensitive to storage, manipulation, and of course, comparability studies are very complex. So we're not talking about any molecule or any medication. These are interesting structures that will definitely affect the patient's safety. Now, let's talk a little bit about what needs to be checked when it comes to biosimilar drugs. So when we're talking about safety, what are the checks? What are the controls we must have? Well, obviously, you need to have a strong regulatory framework that is well defined to protect the patient's safety. Authorities are constantly assessing the risk-benefit analysis of all for all patients. So, for example, you need to have further information about the product, or you can even restrict use to safeguard the patient's health. Another important check is understanding if you have the same safety controls for all biosimilar medicines. All biosimilars need to have safety components, and they should include and follow the same requirements that we use for the reference drug. It's important to mention that there's no specific requirement for a biosimilar when it comes to the patient's safety. And there's no additional regulatory requirements for safety. And also, we need to always have an active risk management plan. Risk management is a dynamic document. It changes. Excuse me, I was muted. So risk management needs to be an active plan, and it should always change considering what is being observed. So all alerts bring about changes, but they need to be very specific for each product, and that includes a pharmacovigilance plan to reduce and minimize any risks that medications may have. So active risk management plans should always be used because as we're talking about biological products, biosimilars are new molecules. So authorities have a special interest in ensuring safety. And I'd also like to talk about the framework for these controls and safety. Because when you look at the product information, you might need some additional tests. For example, medical alerts, educational leaflets for patients, and the inclusion of patient in registries. So any additional measures applied to a reference drug, for example, educational material, should also be used for its biosimilar. And they should be comparable so that the information is aligned and so that you can also collect any information that might be requested. For safety controls, you might also need periodical safety reports, maybe every 6 months and then every year. And after 3 years, according to the authorities' requirements, or every 5 years. Drugs that have a black triangle are in vigilance for 50 years, and we'll discuss that in the next few slides. Okay.
So, again, talking about my favorite word, pharmacovigilance, you know that this will be specialized in assigning and certain strategies for detection, for understanding and prevention of adverse events or any other problem related. This is where we have a special focus on risk management plan for a biosimilar. There might be different focuses, but we see a slighter trend for specific theme. It is important, as I said before, that biosimilars are submitted to the same pharmacosurveillance as the reference drug for after commercialization. And this risk management plans that must be prepared and handed with the of the approval. The risk management plan will increase. Well, there is an increase on pharmacovigilance measures. We can identify immunogenicity risks like a secondary loss of effect in patients, non-naive patients, and plasmatic concentration as the presence of neutralizing antibodies. And this this specific focus in the risk management plan may be implement special post-market surveillance and identify new safety risks. Then we have the same plan, risk management plan, but focusing the patient, where we will see specific details on prescribing information like warnings, production of educational brochures, that specialized training program, additional clinical studies, clinical trials, and long-term follow-up of treated patients. Well, talking about additional post-market activities, or we say that the approval of a drug for marketing implies that the efficacy has been demonstrated and that the undesirable effects detected in pre-marketing studies were acceptable, although this does not mean that the benefit-risk ratio is definitive. This is what makes us understand that post-market studies enables the follow-up of known risks and detect the non-frequent risks that only raise when we treat a major number of heterogeneous patients throughout a long period. The criteria for that, well, it's necessary to have post-market studies are the same for all drugs, including biosimilars. If a post-market safety study was required for a reference drug, for instance, it's probable, and usually this will also be required for a biosimilar. In this slide, I will take the task of talking a lot because we have a lot to discuss regarding the communication of adverse events in clinical practice. With patients, there we have opportunities and challenges. Definitely, necessary biomedical information available. The challenge is how to seek them and how to present them. Health care professionals, they have knowledge and they take decisions based on different sources, institutions or healthcare clinics or production centers that deliver this information. And it is normalized in the clinical practice that documents or sources used are not really clear or unified. For instance, protocols, algorithms, consensus, oftentimes referring to a same topic, but not in a standardized way. So we have to start from the basics, that healthcare professionals be empowered with the knowledge and concepts around biosimilars. This is of crucial importance. For instance, in managing concepts, a comparability assessment that is understood, that is made to confirm the profile of a drug and also for a biosimilar, especially in a process of interchangeability carried out by the product manufacturer, has to consider the history, the concepts like bioequivalence assessment that are established to define the safety efficacy profile of products in an independent way for this manufactured product. And as for the healthcare professionals and clinicians, in Spain, the Spanish Society of Primary Attention Clinicians presented in 2018 in the 38th Congress of the Society the result of a survey on more than 700 healthcare professionals and that deal with biosimilars in primary care. And the result of it is that 58% of clinicians surveyed are not able to describe what a biosimilar is, and 3 each 4 they do not manage them, do not feel comfortable on managing them. So we have to improve the information available, the information we supply to professionals, empower them, and definitely provide this knowledge and this understanding. They have to understand what is the objective of a development program, what are the pillars, and what is carried out with this creation and development when the prescribers we have to imply reverse engineering of a reference drug to produce the biosimilar, but with the same quality and the same safety efficacy profile. Therefore, these studies and the knowledge delivered to clinicians should be explained, understood, and thorough so they really understand. There is a conflict we see in the institutional culture and in the clinical practice, and we have to change this understanding. It is key that all the stakeholders get involved adding value to the definition, to the concepts, and also pharmacovigilance data of the biosimilar products to guarantee, at the end of the day, the success in health, in results, in outcomes, in the evolution, and correct adaptation and growth of public health in world level. So many of the parties involved in the development of biosimilar, we allow to understand that this refers to complex processes. Authorities also analyze all this information. So, as for that black triangle, in European Union, it means the additional measures that a drug might have. So, EU established the additional monitoring for a drug that is more dangerous. So these drugs that have this additional monitoring should have this information in their inserts and in the brochures. This is known as the technical material safety information, which is an upside down black triangle. That means that this drug is submitted to additional monitoring, which is very important because clinicians, healthcare professionals, patient advocates see this triangle and can interpret in a wrong way. So we understand, and this is also used in the main member states of European Union and other countries. With that, we identify a closer monitoring. And this is not just for biosimilar, for any drug. And this has to be made very clear. Additionally, among the activities we have to take care, pharmacovigilance is one of them. As I said, we should use pharmacovigilance and all be players to use this information as a basis and feedback constantly for the safety profile of a drug. Pharmacovigilance use different techniques. One of them is spontaneous or voluntary communication of adverse events. Other more complex methods are the health reports or clinical reports that may not be applicable for some countries. And therefore, there is a sub-notification, incomplete communication, and external factors that are not known. Voluntary data may be non-precise or incomplete. This is a deficiency and also requires the participation in a voluntary registry in the practice or in the institution. This pharmacovigilance notification processes must be easier and friendly when used, so the notification could come from any party, including patients and other healthcare professionals, so we can have a truthful measure of adverse events of biosimilars. And in the end of the day, we will know, we will thank, because an early detection and evaluation of adverse events in the assessment of these adverse events, like unexpected events, may supply additional information that are really important when we present information and define the risk management plan, and also in the world level, so we can detect and make this information transparent and with the traceability for biosimilars. So to conclude, I hope I didn't take too long. The success of the strategy of risk communication for adverse events, the success of this communication depends on or means having a robust risk management plan and ability to identify and communicate potential issues. And with that, having an effective communication system for medication, clear prescription, and registration. Therefore, we need an active participation of all professionals, all stakeholders actually, professionals, patients, authorities, and of course the pharmaceutical industry. Additionally, in the clinical practice, it is convenient to place risk communication in a broader sense. Proper communication is achieved with mutual respect and trust between parties, as we have it between patient and professional. And this will depend on the perception of patient or professional of the technical scientific knowledge of the professional, but also in the feeling of being heard during clinical interview. And with that, we can understand much better reactions, events that are happening with a drug by hearing patients. With this, we can contribute with information in a structured fashion using, and it's very important to use when patient, a more easy language, understanding patient values, so the risks noticed by patient is conveyed. Risk perception of patient are a function of the what we already discussed. There are patients that are more expressive. There are other patients that are more introspective or use words that we have to be able to understand, be assertive, and have clear what we have to establish. And lastly, understand that the pharmacovigilance systems in Latin America and the Caribbean, which my pearls that I observe very carefully, have to be more proactive than reactive to the alerts of communications in the drugs in the market, and have a project to increase communication and harmonization in Latin America for pharmacovigilance, and also in standards and normatives. Well, I know this is not an easy task. We have a lot of challenges ahead, but we have to understand that this is a step-by-step advance, and we have to be positive in the way we deliver information and be careful so patients supply information that we can consolidate. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Once again, I would like to thank, and you can contact me for any case in these addresses when you need. Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. Any questions? Does anyone? Well, I believe there is a question in the chat that you can answer. What are the opportunities to improve pharmacovigilance mechanisms, but not only with authorities, but with patient advocate associations? Or is there any clear information that you can discuss to report and increase the level of real-world data that may be raised with patients and current patients and authorities? This is one of the actions that I mentioned, where all the stakeholders regarding the drug, their patients, healthcare professionals, authorities, we have to apply that. That is communication. It takes work and time, but we have to deliver information, be transparent, and with a right traceability. educate and empower healthcare professionals and patients. Among patients, there's a lot of misinformation. We are living the pandemics of misinformation. So we have to fight against many things. This is another challenge. We have to update ourselves, but also work with the sources, require and seek good sources, educate patients, empower clinicians and healthcare professionals, and a lot of this work may be performed by pharmaceutical industry to strengthen the risk management plans, because this is the pillar. Without pharmacovigilance plan, without risk management plans, we will have constraints for the concerns that emerge from patient safety with the topics that emerged with products and drugs. So it is very important to have a robust system, and translating these topics to patient associations, clinician association, so we can share this information, but with other voices that are not as technical. When we talk to patients, we have to be very careful with our vocabulary. When we talk to clinicians and healthcare professionals, we have to be precise and supply correct information, but we have to eliminate the biases that may confuse them, and most of the time do not supply correct information, and they don't know where to find it. So it is a joint work where we can potentialize communication, and as I said, teamwork with a single objective, which is patient health and health outcomes for health institutions and for all of us as society, for the right development and evolution, which is the evolution of biosimilars. I'm sure that by applying these measures and being careful and giving the due importance to the information we supply, in 10 years, maybe we are sitting here having a very different conversation. Thank you, Laura. I believe that there's no further questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I believe that everything was really clear. Thank you, Laura. Applauses. Thank you very much. Pura vida. And have a nice day. Thank you.
Antes da gente passar para a próxima apresentação, que também a gente vai conectar.
So before we continue with the next presentation, in which we will connect to Mexico, I would like to thank the companies that sponsored this event: Merck, Sartorius, Paul, Sativa, Uniciva, Thermo Fisher, and Terumo. Without them, we probably would not be here today with this much information, and also the associations that supported us in this event: Alanac, Abifina, Progenericos, Unifar, Cindy Fargo, Fundapso, and OAB. They're also our supporters in this initiative. So now we will connect to Mexico. I think you can hear us well, right? Hello, good morning. Good morning, Jorge. We are here with Jorge Revila from ProBiomed. He's the medical director. And we also have Alma Fernandez, who is a pharmacovigilance manager from Biomed. And they will tell us about good distribution practices from the stakeholder perspective. Thank you, Jorge. I think we're hearing you very well. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you to Jack Leckerman and Liliana Vargas for their support in bringing me to this presentation. You can share my first slide, please. Just a minute, please. Of course.
Se você tem apresentação, pode compartilhar com nós outros por sua pantalla, não?
So maybe you can share your presentation with us.
Ah, já está compartilhando aí.
Liz, queremos comentar sobre.
So we would like to talk about good distribution practices and how this important part of the process of producing biosimilars has an impact on the patient safety. So first slide, please. So this is a pillar in the good development of a biosimilar industry. To have a regular distribution chain is very important. It means involving all stakeholders related to distribution, and you need to constantly improve and expand on what you're doing. In order to maintain the final quality of the product, it is important to have a very regulated process in which you need the participation of the industry, authorities, both local and international, and of course, the participation of the patient himself, who will allow you to maintain the level of quality that you desire. This is what will make patients receive their medication that is efficient, useful, and safe. It is important to take into account that there needs to be an alignment in good manufacturing practices. Without them, products will not be developed in appropriate conditions for use in humans. It's also important to regulate and follow the guidelines of good storage practices and, of course, good distribution practices. So without the participation of government authorities, local to each country, these activities would not be sustainable long term. So it's very important to make agreements in which all of the stakeholders will participate in these processes. They all need to be committed to maintaining good practices so that the product does not suffer any changes, so that it is not damaged or changed. And finally, what is important is to maintain what we achieved after approval. We know that approval is very restrictive for biosimilars, and any company that wishes to maintain its market on a biosimilar medication needs to follow very restrictive regulations. So this aims to make sure that products will have high quality with the same efficacy and safety as the reference drugs. Global distribution requires some very interesting safety measures. All precautions need to be taken to prevent against the appearance or introduction of medications with a lower level of quality than what is required. And of course, we need to avoid any changes to drugs that have already been approved. That, of course, requires very complex activities that will ensure to the prescriber of a biosimilar drug and the patient themselves to be able to have the confidence that the drug that they are taking is exactly the same as was prescribed. It's important for them to understand that this will be a product that will allow them to control a pathological entity, and it will not be subject to any problems. Concentration will not have changed in each dose. Quality will not be substandard in its manufacturing. So this is essential so that the confidence in the pharmaceutical industry prevails, and so that we really can innovate with biosimilar drugs that are very high quality. The system requires us to have standard policies in pharmaceutical corporations, in which we have training programs that need to be maintained constantly. And furthermore, these activities should allow us to select the best distributors who have that same commitment to quality and who will maintain this distribution chain working appropriately. So without the active and committed participation of the stakeholders, the chain will become very vulnerable. And it can lead to inappropriate medications being offered to our patients. So it is very, very important to participate with distributors. And safety measures need to be implemented, such as the detection of substandard products or falsified products. And without the participation of all stakeholders, these measures will not be applied. It is important to have constant audits to the system. The distribution chain needs to be audited frequently to verify precisely if good practices are being followed in distribution, in storage, and in manufacturing. And it should be maintained over the lifespan of the product. And it's not simple to keep a good, healthy distribution chain. It requires controls, monitoring. It requires management procedures. It needs good administration that is connected to following guidelines. Transportation needs to be very restrictive. It needs to be well controlled. You need to ensure that there is a good supply of raw materials, and it should always be restricted. So obsolete materials should not be mixed with the current materials. The transportation and storage temperature should not change. Humidity is an important factor. We know that in Latin American countries, humidity can be quite high. Access to facilities should be well controlled, because this is what will prevent any criminal activities from happening, such as theft or the introduction of falsified materials. In order to manage medications, the receival of products should also be restrictive. We should not allow any entry to warehouses for the producing company or its distributors. No products should be allowed to go into the facilities if they do not comply with the specifications. So receiving medications and the global distribution chain are critical parts of the process, because this is going to limit to a wide extent the possibility of having any inappropriate medications in the distribution chain. Cleaning facilities, inventory management, and managing obsolete products or products that have been refused should be documented as well. By carrying out these activities, all the health agencies and prescribers will be able to trust in the fact that there will not be any products moving in the distribution chain without complying to the regulations that are so strict in approving these drugs. Transportation is also a very important piece of this. The conditions of biosimilar medications are very specific when it comes to humidity, temperature, contact with other substances. These are all very critical factors because biosimilar drugs are very, very effective. They're very safe, but they do require a specific chain that will allow you to determine specifically what conditions they can be kept in to be stable over time and to reach the patient's hands in optimal conditions. So transportation needs to be done within the appropriate time frames. It needs to be within the appropriate temperature ranges. And above anything else, they need to maintain the medication's quality at all times. This requires constant auditing, it requires constant training, it requires participation that needs to be committed from the pharma industry itself and all the stakeholders in distribution and physicians themselves. Prescribers and patients and users need to be alert and they need to be active participants in this process to maintain quality, detecting and reporting any irregularities to take any measures necessary to maintain product quality. Next slide, please.
Y este proceso es una operación.
This process needs to be a multi-stage operation involving different areas, which need to constantly interact with each other. It includes manufacturers, distributors, transporters. They need to constantly be aware of the controls and the regulations involved. This, of course, is changing constantly. We recently saw with the use of COVID vaccines that required very specific chains to transport them, and they established very restrictive quality measures. So distribution chains need to be very appropriate so that you can make sure that products reach the patient's hands. Next slide, please.
¿Cómo está conformado toda esta cadena?
So how is this entire chain organized?
Se tiene que realizar el inicio del punto.
It's important to start the chain from its starting point based on good manufacturing practices. That is the only way in which we will have a product with the quality and the standards that we desire. And that is how you reach a good distribution practice. There, you need to have good import and export practices as well. And this will all allow that products are following the appropriate steps for their distribution. And it's important to not have any issues that might create problems for your medications. Product security is something that needs to be surveilled with broad measures, so codes, constant verifications. It is important to develop detection technologies that will allow you to say exactly what batch each product came from which production plant, and to make sure that no changes were made during its transportation. A batch reaching a distribution chain should be the same that left the facility. It should not have changed during the process. This detection technology will allow us to detect at any point any changes made to the process of transportation, and it will allow us to state that we have the right batch and allow it to continue to the patient. It's also important to have tracing systems that will allow you to know exactly where the product was, for how long, and how or in which conditions it reached a distribution center. It's also important to establish surveillance and monitoring systems. And these systems are constantly evolving. They should not be left behind because technology overcomes distribution conditions precisely. It needs to follow it precisely, and they need to be constantly monitored. Also, points of contact need to be established, and they need to be single points of contact so that you can ensure a restrictive control over them, and so that no responsibilities should be concentrated. And this will allow you to continue the process with organization and complying with regulations.
And once it reaches the point of sales, we have to follow good clinical practices and good pharmaceutical procedures for those in charge of the pharmacy that will deliver the product to the patient so it works the way it was designed to work, and to avoid any abuse. There is a new stakeholder in this game, which is internet sales. It is a process that facilitates the purchase of medications, but there are risks involved, and is extremely vulnerable. So, and it also should follow the same good distribution practices, good storage practices, and have a very active participation, because internet sales, although very useful, they may also promote or miracle drugs or panaceas that are not delivered in the right condition to the patients. patients can receive suboptimum medications or over the concentration, and this leads to severe damage. Internet sales probably will increase more, but there should be specific regulations to avoid any negative impact on the very medication, on the distribution chain that is already complex as is. And we also just received the information that Amazon received a letter, a warning letter from FDA for distributing in their product, in their chain, a non-FDA approved drug that was delivered to a patient. This warning requires that measures are corrected and avoid this event to happen again. There are many examples like this one that require that internet distribution and sales have a much higher level of regulation than it has now. Then a patient receives the product, use it, and then the responsibility of the distribution chain is finished and starts the pharmacovigilance responsibility. We as pharmaceuticals, the end of our responsibility with patients is different. It is continuous, and we may say has no end, no specific finishing point, because the patient can continue communicating with us about the effects to which the product was designed, if it was in the amount and the quantity and ratio as prescribed by the doctor. And we will see, Dr. Fernanda will mention this pharmacovigilance process, and we will see how do we respond to this responsibility. Next one, please. The summary of that is that the logistic of distribution channel requires controls and monitoring. The evaluation parameter is finding all of that within specs. To avoid that non-reaching these specifications or suboptimal specifications, retail should comply with this, abide by the standards and abide by the regulation we just mentioned. Transport shall be on time, and drugs that must arrive in perfect conditions to the hands of the patient. Delivery and distribution of drugs should be accurate and complete. We cannot have boxes with half content or more content than what is described and prescribed. And this requires precision and compliance. Supply chain, to have a safe supply, requires prevention, detection, and response strategies and actions. Taking actions must be constant, cannot be sporadic. They must be constant, continuous, and according to the regulation. And lastly, next slide. This process is only concluded when patients receive the therapy prescribed by the clinician, and when it has efficacy and safety effects. At this moment, we may say that this distribution chain was successful and maintained the quality of the pharmaceutical product in a proper use quality. And I will ask Dr. Fernanda to explain what happens once the patient receives the medication. Dr. Fernanda, please. Oh, and is there any question to this part?
Al final lo haremos.
What will we do? Questions at the end. Dr. Fernanda, please.
Alma, creo que está en mute, no te escuchamos.
I believe you're muted. I'm sorry, it's Dr. Alma Fernandez, not Dr. Fernanda.
¿Nos escuchan?
Can you hear? Yes, now it is working. And also your camera is off. Can you hear me? So good morning. I thank the invitation made by the organizers. Well, I will address pharmacovigilance beyond the manufacturer and distribution chain, but reaching pharmacovigilance on the level of patient. We will discuss the role of pharmacovigilance since manufacturing and distribution channel up to the patient. And why do we have that? Well, the aim is decreasing risks. We see that there are different possible adverse events, different situations that pharmacovigilance is notified, and measures to mitigate risks can be taken both in the productive process as in the distribution process. So here, what I will present right now is the role of pharmacovigilance as a link among the different stakeholders we have in the supply chain.
Entonces, bueno, estos son los principales actores.
These are the main stakeholders in supply chain. We have the manufacturer, the distributor, the pharmaceutical that stores and delivers the medication to the patient, the client in the case. So, what we will see in this presentation is the role of each of the stakeholders. How can they support, help, and how pharmacovigilance helps us or helps each stakeholder to take part. And what is the role of pharmacovigilance, and what is the importance and the role of each of the stakeholders in pharmacovigilance. We have, when we are manufacturers, when we are in the role of manufacturers, we have to notify any change in the medication, in the formula. The pharmacovigilance unit has to be notified, and usually is one of the, and oftentimes is one of the last one to know. And we have to change the situation because there are several adverse events that may emerge of a change in the medication. So one of the ways to mitigate risks is having a constant communication between pharmacovigilance agency and manufacturer. So, and what is the goal for that? Well, it's mainly identifying quality defects, because any drug that is manufactured, first of all, should follow good manufacturing practices, good distribution practices, and with very strict controls, regardless if it is a pharmacochemical or biological. Any drug we are talking about should follow very strict controls. So, when is there any issue in quality, the department in a manufacturing premise should notify pharmacovigilance. This is a teamwork to strengthen this part of the process. And there's possibility of impurities and contamination. If is there any possibility of contamination or impurities in raw materials, likewise, this has to be communicated to pharmacovigilance. History says that these events happen. For instance, in the case of heparin, where FDA observed an increase on allergy reports. In that case, they observed that there was a substance, chondroitin, aggregated to heparin, and this was leading to allergic reactions in the patient. And when they carried out extended investigation, they saw that there were problems in good manufacturing practices. So the fact that we detect any quality issue or anything that may lead to contamination, be it raw material, equipment, material, this should also be notified to pharmacovigilance agencies as soon as this is identified. In the case of poietin alpha, it was a change in the formula. We all know that EU in 2002, they suspended due to aplasia cases that were being informed. So what happened? It was a simple change in the formulation from albumin to polysorbate. So many cases of aplasia were reported, and they had to review the whole process, and they realized that there was this change in the formulation. So any minor detail, any modification carried out by the manufacturer has to be notified to the pharmacovigilance unit, especially if these aspects can have a direct impact on the patient. Well, we have to consider that one of the parameters we use in pharmacovigilance to know how the drug is the increase in frequency and severity of adverse events. If we have a product any counterfeit or falsified product, if we detect it, or if is there any failures in the cold chain, or if we see destruction of medication, these processes will happen in the distribution chain. The distributor should detect, first of all, they must have records and inventories In the case of biosimilars and biotechnologicals, it is very important to maintain the cold chain. If we break the cold chain, will lead to a lack of efficacy of for the drug not reaching the expected event, a possible adverse event. So distribution chain is extremely important because this can also lead to adverse events. First of all, by using biotechnological products, we see an increase in falsified drugs that happen, for instance, when there is no destruction, there's a process of a medication. There are cases that, well, the distribution chain is very important. If we don't have verification enough of this step, it may be something as simple as maintaining the medication that should be destroyed. This has to be verified. This has to be inspected, because in this step, we had cases notifying lack of efficacy on the patient. The patient didn't have the medication the patient was taking should have been destructed already, was out of date, was expired. So a patient took a drug with no effect or not under specifications and presented adverse reactions. So pharmacovigilance in the distribution chain, a very important point is traceability. If we have traceability, when there is an increase in adverse events, one of the main ways is check with different areas and track back the medication. What hospitals have this medication, under what conditions the medication was when delivered to the patient, and the whole supply chain. We check all the records to know if there was a correct management and handling of the drug.
Okay, so right now, as Dr. Revilla said, we have a problem. Problems with websites and platforms that are now presenting this. Since now medications are being sold through platforms and applications in which you need to make sure that they are complying to all the regulations, so that patients, when they receive an easy access medication, it might not be in the optimal conditions, so it can present adverse reactions. So, although it facilitates our access to medication, yes, it may have some repercussions to the patient's health. So what is the responsibility of a pharmacist? Once you have a medication, first, it should be qualified persons, as we know that many patients, one of the main accesses that they have to a medication is a pharmacist. Oftentimes, they do not even reach physicians. So it's important to have qualified personnel in pharmacies. It is important for pharmacists to have the understanding to review documentations when they are receiving medication. So they need to understand where it is coming, how it is coming, how stable it is when it is received. And it's important to have the right arguments to make sure that medication is in the right conditions. Besides that, one of the most important roles that pharmacists have is in ensuring storage conditions. For example, with biosimilars, they need to make sure that storage conditions are correct. So with COVID-19 vaccines, we know that storage conditions were minus 60 degrees Celsius. So pharmacists need to play a very important role in this process. In the case of biotechnology, of course, I am generalizing, but these are the conditions that biosimilars need to have. They are a biotechnology product, so it is important to ensure that they are conserved at the right conditions. And pharmacists need to understand this so that when medications are given to the patient, they are at optimal conditions. And pharmacists need to be in communication with the manufacturer. And what does this point refer to? Especially to making sure that you have direct communications with the lab whenever there are any questions or whenever something is different in the box or the label. Then the pharmacist needs to make sure that the information is correct. And they need to be able to ask manufacturing labs about the drugs they are giving. Well, and the last part of the chain is the patient. So with pharmacovigilance, what we are doing is making sure that the patient receives the right level of education about the drugs they're taking. There are some strategies for this. We can mention 5 strategies that might help patients in notifying adverse events. And the management of the patient's medications needs also to be maintained at an optimal level. So, for example, one of the options that we provide in educating patients is that regulatory authorities, medical scientific associations, and patient organizations need to be active in propagating this information through education. And we have identified some strategies to be used in informing patients about biosimilars if they take them, so that they have a higher level of confidence, a higher level of understanding, and so they know how to manage this kind of product. Sorry, Alma, we have 5 more minutes. If you could conclude. Your presentation is very good, but since we are a little bit late, if you can conclude in 5 minutes, we would appreciate it. Okay, so I'd like to remind you that it's important to train the patient to use the medication, and patients should read instructions before they start using the medication. They should look at the expiration date on the box. They need to understand the storage conditions, especially for biosimilars, since these are very important factors. And this needs to be explained in accessible language. We need to tell patients about the storage conditions and how they directly impact the drug's efficacy and the presence of adverse events. So there are major risks. These are the stakeholders in the chain, and in pharmacovigilance, we need to ensure if a patient reports an increase in frequency in any adverse events, then the pharmacovigilance area needs to investigate its different areas. So quality, regulatory, distribution. Especially in the distribution chain, it needs to be thoroughly investigated to make sure that if there's any relationship between an increase in frequency in adverse events or the presence of any severe adverse reaction. So it is based on this investigation with different areas that we will generate alerts about medications. So these are some of the examples of the alerts that have been published recently. So in Mexico, we even had one for the COVID vaccine. So my final message to you is this. Medication management by the manufacturer or by the pharmacist or in the distribution channel or in prescription will impact the patient's safety directly. And pharmacovigilance is a very useful tool during the entire drug's life cycle. And good management and good manufacturing and distribution practices will prevent and minimize significant risks to the patient. So that is my final message. Pharmacovigilance is applicable to every part of the patient's life cycle. So these are my contact information. That's all. Thank you. Great, thank you. Do we have any questions?
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Vanessa Perez.
Hello, good morning. My name is Vanessa Perez, and I'm speaking on behalf of Unifarm. My question is, well, I'd like to tell you that according to different countries' regulations and international guidelines, I understand that one of the biggest challenges that we have in the chain is transportation and ensuring that the product is maintained in the right conditions during its transportation to the final location. So how do you perceive this risk, and how much has it impacted pharmacosurveillance? Since one of the items that you mentioned in your presentation was maintaining the cold chain. Thank you. Yes, that's a very good question. It's very interesting how the transportation conditions make a big difference. There are contracts and commitments made with the transportation companies. And what we need from them is for it to be officially recognized that they have the appropriate processes according to the specifications, and that they comply to the regulation specified for the transportation of biosimilars. So we have constant auditing for the transportation companies, and it is important not to rupture these safety measures during transportation. We have had some incidents. Correction measures are usually taken. And these transportation companies are then kept under observation to make sure that measures are working and so that no incidents take place during transportation. Great, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Let's give our speakers a hand. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Nós vamos ter break agora e
We're going to
voltaremos.
have a short break and we will be back in 20 minutes at 12 sharp. Thank you.
Obrigado, muchas gracias.
Hasta luego.
Eu não tenho deve ser, eu tinha uma época, mas assim, mas era uma coisa que eu sabia, eu sabia latim. Outra coisa que eu falava latim, vou saber de falar lá, que a área, eu vejo eles.
Você é grego? Porque, por exemplo, nossa série, uma palavra serve 3, 4 significados. Quando é porca, você tem porca, animal.
tem parafuso, tem manga,
Entendeu? Mandar fruta, então assim,
meia, mas meia usar diferente do meio cultural.
Isso faz meia questão matemática, meia questão numérica, você fala 6, você fala 1, e você também tem opção. Por exemplo, se você está pegando, você quer, em vez de falar, eu quero tentar de falar. Então, aí você vai a verdade. Mas eu nação. Que hoje não tinha. Mas também não é possível. Você vai ter, se você pegar alguma conjugação de lugar, você vai ter mais conjugação de lugar. Você vai ter cacete. Se você vai ter, você tem uma aqui não. Aí eu deixei isso. Aqui não. Pretendo ficar.
Deve ser perfeito no plural. Mas também os negócios lá diferentes, o inglês também tem os três diferentes lá também, que é faz, sem culturais.
Sem passar por exemplo, colocar isso aí.
Se a gente não se vender no lado, tem poucas palavras para fazer uma coisa. Então, tipo assim, vou chutar. A gente vai comprar. Eu posso comer, me compro, é uma palavra um negócio que eu
acho que é tipo alemão, por exemplo, de doente, porque é doença. É que é cada de doente. Não, mas eu vou assim, os outros países têm inglês e inglês. Se você juntar ele com outra, você sabe o que é. Nós não. Eu falei para você, falou assim, você vai pagar meio. Nós estamos pagar meio que. Você fala para o americano, vai continuar a pagar meio. A gente sabe que vai pagar meia de alguma coisa, agora, se você coloca no banco, você não vai pagar meia. Você vai pagar meia.
Não, outro dia não teve muita influência. Tinha uma que eu joguei para você, eu tinha que gosto de jogo, tá? Agora atrás, só que para escrever o legal, porque do brasileiro, tudo para você. Só são mais honestos. Você tem que você vai deixar. O cara falava assim, o cara não tem. A minha eu conversou com o vizinho dele, que é um cara que não tem esse negócio que ele falava. Quer ver uma coisa? Eles falavam assim, isso é uma educação assim para a gente, tem sentido de você se colocar, né? Você vai morrer de morte, vai morrer a morte.
Por exemplo, você chega por eu vou pegar ela no seio.
Você nem precisa não pronunciar.
Então, mas a gente tira sarro. Então, mas eu falo para você, só que detalhe, a nossa língua vem do português. Do português Portugal, né? Vem do Portugal. Só que nós do que nada mais é que uma bolsa para aquilo. As mulheres antigamente usavam, elas usavam seria uma bolsete. Não, seria bolsete. Primeiro, nós colocamos era uma bolsa, tinha a bolsa e a mala. Essa bolsa. Você sabe aquelas carteiras hoje que usa antigamente, até os anos 60, 70, isso, quando você abre o negócio, isso, 40, é isso. Funciona igual.
É igual, a gente não sabe bem.
Mas eu vou dizer assim, nós pegamos a nossa língua, que era muito mas isso você vai ter todo o nosso todo o nosso todo ele é Portugal. Todo ele é Portugal.
Aquela cena em cruz, sabe? Português de Portugal. É uma vitória
Gostamos de tão linguajar. É o chute. O chute é uma palavra branca. Por quê? Antigamente, quem veio fazer minha avó aqui, começou a minha avó, eles tinham, algum pediam o povo falava. Então, tudo que eles falavam, fazia uma coisa, não, porque
isso é difícil mesmo, porque tinha assim, tinha metodologia muito portuguesa e aqueles professores você aprendeu a resolução. São assim, virtual cards, não sabia, não lembro vocês também têm que fazer mas eu tenho pessoas vocês não têm mas você tem essa deve saber no lugar porque chama de gente, eu não sei, o pessoal coloca
Eu sei que isso hoje em dia tem 50 isso, você sabe o que é isso? Isso é o que está pelo que ensinou. Sim, eu vejo os quatro. Criança que chegou para uma criança que você olha para a criança e vai disputar. Isso, criança que está por província, acha que criança propícia a falar as coisas. Criança, bem e é da casa. Governante. Então, eu entendo, eu não consigo falar. Na verdade, nem o português eu não consigo falar direito.
Águia governador, aquele que reina com uma águia aqui. É verdade.
Você vê que eu tenho
os germânicos antigamente eram os alemães e antes eles ficavam de outra vez.
É vizinho.
Mas tudo para esses caras só se estava. A partir do ano vai ser justa, a cheguei meio chuva, daí se vai proteger eu arquivo ele já tem da conta, meu nome sempre me der para essa origem arquiteto, não sei onde famoso clichê, clichê silvestre. No Brasil, garantir esse efeito, nosso efeito comum. O nome do governo permitir nossas brilhante, luminoso, Não, mas hoje no cronograma está falando. Então, você também não seleciona. Também vai encher o efeito luminoso. É melhor que o efeito luminoso. Ele muda para o bagulho. É aquele que está assistindo. 2020. Onde foi mais ou menos será? Então, mas depois.
Podemos regressar?
Shall we continue?
Tem tanto e-mails para responder. Quando eu cheguei em casa, eu respondi até sangue. Tudo bem? Bem. Certo. Legal. Bem? Podemos voltar?
Shall we continue? It's a pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Bianca Schiavetti, who will tell us about a pharmacovigilance case study. She is a gastroenterologist, and she is going to tell us about a real-world case and how she dealt with it. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Jack Leckerman for inviting me to be here, especially Liliana, who contacted me. I'd like to congratulate the organizers. I know that it has been said that none of the speakers here have any sort of payment, and these are my potential conflicts of interest. I'd like to start off by saying that I have two special reasons for being here: money and a lack of education. And I think all of you are also here because of money and for a lack of education. Money, because if you think about it, the starting principle for a biosimilar to be developed is to reduce its cost. So we are all here for money. And if an event like this was organized and is being carried out, is because we still have, after so much time after the first biosimilar was developed, a lack of education from several stakeholders on what a biosimilar is, how it needs to be used in the market ethically, to reduce many confounding factors. So we are all here in a way or the other for financial reasons and for a reason of lack of education about biosimilars. So I'd like to congratulate the organizers for this and for forming these opinions so well, fostering good information about biosimilars. I'm a gastroenterologist. I work with inflammatory bowel disease. Biosimilars work differently for each one of you. You are in contact with biosimilars differently in your lives, and each one has a different context. But in my context, biosimilars are used for inflammatory bowel diseases, in treating diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. These diseases are used in patients of all ages and both genders. But it has a higher incidence in young patients, young adults. And in this age, we see that they are very active. Patients who are very active in all aspects, especially the economy. So when we talk about actively or economically active, we have to discuss the fact that these treatments come at a cost, but if patients are not appropriately treated, they will suffer indirect costs of not treating their disease. Patients will have a cost of treatment, but if they're not treated, they will have to go through hospitalizations, surgery, paid leave. So there is a disease that has a burden when they are treated, but it can be even more expensive if they are not treated. So this is where biosimilars come in. The incidence and prevalence of these diseases has been growing in Brazil and around the world. This is different from state to state. We now have a general prevalence in Brazil of 80 for every 100,000 patients, so it's no longer a rare disease. If we look at some states in the north of Brazil, the prevalence is much lower. But if you look, for example, at São Paulo, we have 144 patients for every 100,000 patients. But prevalence is much higher, and there are some factors associated to it, such as the Human Development Index, sanitation, urbanization, and a proportion of whites. Our treatment scenario, the kind of medications we use, when we look at moderate to severe IBD, biological medications fit into the treatment. So when we look at biotechnology, this also includes biosimilars. There's a range of medications currently available in the market, and some of them have biosimilars developed for them. And remember that the context here is the cost in healthcare. The federal government has healthcare as its second highest expense following Social Security. So when we look at the federal spending in healthcare and expenses in the health sector, public and private, it represents over 7% of our GDP. When we look at the last year, and when we see that we had a higher expense in the public healthcare system to buy equipment because of COVID, to try to cover the repressed demand from elective surgeries that were postponed. In the last year, we had a reduction of 20% of funds for the public healthcare system. So it's an area that has the second highest spending that received cuts in the last year. And when we look at medications, we can see that only biologicals are 2% of drugs listed in the Ministry of Health, but this 2% represents 41% of medication expenses in the healthcare system. So it's a large expense for a small percentage of the drugs in the Ministry of Health. In order to develop a new biological drug, $2 billion are spent.
But less than 10% of each.
Nearly 10% of every developed biological comes to each market. So let's continue with what we have in my clinic. I have a female patient who is young, at a young, productive age, 39. And in 2018, she started presenting these symptoms. And the idea here is not to discuss a clinical case, but this is the reality for that patient. Abdominal pain, diarrhea, weight loss, mucus in her stools, and she constantly had to come to the emergency system.
Depois de 8 meses, então, do início da terapia biológica, essa paciente estava em remissão.
After 8 months, the patient had remission. But they were being treated with the originating immunobiological. But in the beginning of 2021, last year, she started her HMO, and they had an internal protocol for the use of a biosimilar. So she switched to a biosimilar. So contrary to what is happening today, we're now seeing biosimilars being used in the public healthcare system, and a switch due to the imposition of the ministry. But in gastroenterology and inflammatory bowel disease, it started happening in the private sector first, especially because of these procurement contracts, negotiations in the private system. And this is what happened. So when she had that health insurance taken out, there was a need to switch for that drug. So they had an internal protocol to switch because they had a deal with a certain company. So adalimumab that they used was Angivita. So I spoke to the patient, I explained that to her, and this was in the beginning of 2021. If this had been in the beginning of her disease in 2018, this would have been my reaction, because in 2018, my perspective of biosimilars was completely different. In 2018, in July, I went to Brasilia to FLAB, the Latin American Forum on Biosimilars, because I had a very poor outlook on biosimilars, but I didn't want to rule them out without trying them. So I went to the event to have enough information to be able to not like biosimilars, because in my mind, they were not good, but I wanted to have enough information to have a sound basis for my opinion. And that's when the key switched. That's when I realized how wrong I was. So if what had happened to my patient last year had happened in the beginning of her disease, my attitude would have been completely different. Unfortunately, this is the attitude that many prescribers still have, and that is now happening as biosimilars are being used in the public and private market, because they have no information, they have no knowledge, or it is reached, or they are reached with misinformation, and they pass that effect to the patient. And the chance of a switch not working is very high, or the chance of having to deal with a switch or even changing the medication and not switching to the same drug is high and is taking place. So this kind of education is extremely important. In 2019, there was a conference, and in fact, I was in that conference earlier today, and I will return to it today. The Inflammatory Bowel Disease Week. And in 2019, they had a survey with biosimilars. So specialists in inflammatory bowel disease, 731 responses, and 71% of physicians said that education in biosimilars is confusing. And that was in 2019. And I can tell you that since then, not much has changed. Fortunately for the patient, I was at a very different time, and in understanding the information I already had, the patient was educated on the switch. She received the information in safety. The switch was carried out, and it was appropriate because I knew what she had been using. And that's where pharmacosurveillance comes in. And this has been said here. She switched from Mirena to Longevita. She continues to take it in May. I repeated, and she continues in remission after the switch. There are many studies showing the efficacy after the switch. GDIB, which is the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Study Group, put out an official position in May considering what would be the ideal scenario for a patient to switch. And in this ideal scenario, it would be for patients who are already in remission, and both the prescriber and the patient need to understand that a switch is being made and what is the medication that the patient is receiving, so that we, prescribers, can participate in pharmacosurveillance. And a single switch should be used so that patients don't receive different medications oftentimes. So with biosimilars in the market, we will have reduced expenditures. All biosimilars approved by Anvisa prove the three basic factors: quality, efficacy, and safety. And this investment in education and health policies minimize the nocebo effect in physicians and in prescribers or in patients, which is the main benefit of biosimilars: sustainability. Thank you. Great, so we're now open for questions. I'm sure that we'll have many here. Can we take the microphone over to them? My name is Patricia. Congratulations for that talk. I didn't understand this. The study group, from what I understood, decided to only switch once and during remission, or could it be in the beginning of the treatment? Patricia, according to GDIB, the patient should be in remission. So a switch should be avoided if the patient still has active disease. And this is an inflammatory disease. If your patient is during a flare, if the disease is active, you know, with every biological, you have an induction phase and a maintenance stage. So let's say a biological has the first 3 applications for induction. Ideally, the first one in the originator should not be carried out if the second one is going to be a biosimilar. Induction should be made, the patient should be observed, and then there should be a switch. So this is the ideal scenario for a switch. I'll give you another example. Recently, in July, we had infliximab for inflammatory bowel disease. Infliximab, an enzyme from Celltrion. And it was rushed, so patients would go to the pharmacy and they had to switch. It was done differently in each state, and that created a huge problem for patients and for physicians. Then the Ministry of Health recently put out a technical note for adalimumab, and it was much more restrictive. So Brazil was split into different groups. A certain group would use the originator, a certain group would use a biosimilar, and the switch would be made for patients who had been in therapy for at least 1 year. And you can only switch again after 1 year. So switches would be spaced. That was something that we discussed yesterday as well. So that prevents switches, many switches in a short span of time. So ideally, patients would be switched after they have already become stable with the medication, because that will prevent you from, you know, having to see if that adverse event was due to the switch or if it was due to a nocebo effect. So the patient would be stabilized with a drug. You would only switch once, at least in a short span of time, so avoiding multiple switches. And it would be done with patients knowing what medication they are using. So both parties would be aware of it, and that would increase pharmacovigilance.
Any further questions? I'm Priscilla. Congratulations for the talk. A doubt. Just adding to the previous question. A recently diagnosed patient naive for treatment, and then there's a situation like this one that the healthcare insurance doesn't have access to the reference. So, considering that biosimilar can be a first step for treatment, what would be the conduct for a naive patient? Naive patients for any drug. There's no preference. And then I'll give my personal opinion. There is what the medical society recommends, and I believe we are in condition of having an early switch. For instance, patients in the public healthcare system in São Paulo city required us to fill in a form with authorizing the knowledge of the exchange by the ministry and authorize prescribing biosimilar to patients. I informed all my patients of this exchange, even those in the beginning of treatment without remission, they all had this authorization signed because not treating is not an option for me. So oftentimes the ideal world is not the real world. And if it is naive, patient doesn't matter the drug. You are choosing a molecule. Thank you. Thank you very much. And no patient refuse. The patients trust the clinicians. If you have a good clinician-patient relationship, it has a major influence in the way they receive the treatment and the effect of the treatment. Just provoking the medical societies, they speak up from time to time regarding biosimilars, the start of these products, for what type of patients, and there are differences when we talk about hematology, oncology, and so on and so forth. Each society with a different position. Shouldn't we have a moment when this would be transformed in a normative by Anvisa or by the Ministry of Health to avoid this chaos in interchangeability and sub-regulations that are approved for each society that leads to some confusion for patients or our peer clinicians that are not following up the issue? How do you see the role of Anvisa or the Ministry of Health? How could this connection be? Well, Anvisa does not pronounce themselves. They put, well, the clinicians have the authority to decide. We have very good agency for technology evaluation. So everything Anvisa approves has high level of quality and safety. But Anvisa does not fulfill the role of saying what is good, what is bad in terms of behaviors. They say that the doctor has a voice and is entitled to decide. But if we consider the public, we don't have this voice in the public system because the ministry buys and distributes. So I don't have any power of choice in private as well. So I have no voice. So this regulation does not exist. What we see is an agency that does not pronounce itself. It says that the doctor, the clinician, has to be aware of what is going on. Well, we are communicated, but that's it. So we are lacking that. We import data, real-world data from abroad. We bring knowledge. In Europe, biosimilar is a reality. Then we import a lot of the experience in rheumatology. If we talk to rheumatologists, they are much easier with that, much easier. And with that, this decreases our fears, our concerns. But if we had a more clear position from the regulating agencies, which be much better. But the fact is, we prescribers decide nothing in public or private sector. Thank you for the presentation. I'm Tatiana from Biomangrinhos, Fiocruz. We saw how producers and regulating agencies, so we have a high level of responsibility, and we work with the Ministry of Health, with the state and city departments of health. Gastroenterology has a strong movement, but how is the relationship? How is the communication? Do you have any direct channel of communication with the Ministry of Health, and how is it with the state the health department of the states? If you, as a society or as individual clinicians, do you have this channel of communication with the local health managers? Yes, there is. The Brazilian Society of Rheumatology has this channel of communication with the ministry. This is there was an increase in this type of communication between them, and some clinicians try to have these discussions with the health department in the states. I have this good communication with the Department of Health and with the pharmacy of where I work. So, and also with local auditors where I work. Our role of doctor is there, try to manage our area. Not always is this easy. We depend a lot on people. There are some things that are difficult to change. I will give you an example. Currently, we see the boogeyman in the biosimilar companies because we see them as boogeymen. I will give you an example with the reference infliximab, where Janssen was putting patches in a problem of a ministry, which was infusion clinics. So we have an infusion product, and patients didn't have public venues where they could receive the infusion. And Janssen had infusion clinics, and the patients would register and would receive Janssen program. This is not the registration of clinics.